Tell me your memory. Why does it matter to you? I want to hear
Hi,
your
welcome back
story,
to Tell Me What Happened, the
your point
podcast
of
that
view.
features folks from all walks of
Tell me
life,
what
telling us one
happened
true
to
childhood
you.
story, and how that story, that event, that experience has impacted who they are as an adult. I'm your host, Jay Rehack, and like everybody who's been listening, I've had my share of childhood experiences. Some of them are pretty great, and some of them are pretty miserable, actually. But I'd like to think that everything that's ever happened to me has made me a better person. Again, very questionable. I say it all the time. It's questionable because maybe I'm not such a better person for them. But that's what I'd like to think. That's the illusion I give myself. Anyway, more importantly, today I have as my guest Dana Hall. Dana is a Chicago-based licensed clinical professional counselor and an internationally recognized playwright. Her work, both in therapy and on stage, explores how memory, loss, and resilience shape our lives. She is also the author of Safe Enough to Begin and the Cue the Comedy Monologue book, both available on Amazon. Welcome to the show, Dana Hall.
Hi, Jay. Thanks for having me.
Dana, are you ready to tell your story?
I sure am.
All right, I'm going to get out of the way, Dana. I'm going to mute myself. And then after you tell your story, I'm going to ask you essentially one question. Usually it's a little bit more than one, and that is how you think it's impacted who you are as an adult. But take it away, Dana Hall.
The summer of 1989 felt like most summers when you're 8 years old. Long days that somehow lasted forever, scraped knees from running too fast, and the firm belief that your backyard is basically the entire universe. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and I was lucky enough to have a backyard that felt so enormous when you felt so small. In that yard was a ginormous maple tree. It lived right at the edge of the yard, like it had always been there, tall enough that the branches seemed to belong more to the sky than to us. To adults, it was probably just a tree, something that dropped leaves, occasionally annoyed whoever had to mow the lawn. But to an 8-year-old, it was something entirely different. It was a doorway. The trunk was thick enough that we used it as home base during hide and seek. Whoever was it would press their forehead against the bark and count while the rest of us scattered across the yard. The bark had these deep grooves that your fingers just fit perfectly in, like it had just been waiting for us. The branches, they had their own personality. When we kicked balls or threw things too high, the leaves would catch them and send them somewhere else unexpected, dropping them softly into the grass or redirecting them like the tree had its own decision about where they should land. And I used to talk to the birds that sat in the branches. Sometimes I sang to them, not loudly, just the kind of singing a child does when they think the world might actually be listening back. The squirrels would run along the limbs above me like they were part of the same conversation. That tree was everything. It was a hiding place, a stage, a lookout tower, and a secret world. And if I'm being honest, Jay, it was also a friend. For a lot of kids, imagination is entertainment. For some of us, imagination is survival. When the house felt tense or the adults were arguing, I would slip outside and sit under that tree. The branches were wide enough that when you leaned back and looked up, you could see the house wasn't there anymore. Only leaves and the sky. It felt like stepping into a different world where things were quieter and made more sense. You know, children are remarkable that way. We build small sanctuaries wherever we can. And that tree, it was mine. And one morning, when I was 8 years old, I stood at the kitchen table window and watched them cut that tree down. I remember the sound first, the mechanical tearing of something that had always felt alive. The branches, they shook when the machine grabbed them. Leaves scattered like startled birds. Each cut just felt wrong, like watching someone dismantle a living thing piece by piece. At 8 years old, I didn't have the language for grief yet, but I felt it. I watched as the trunk that held our games and our laughter and my quiet conversations with nature fall into the yard with a heavy thud. The space where it stood looked surprisingly enormous and empty, like a missing tooth in the landscape. I remember thinking something very clearly in that moment. Something alive had just disappeared. It was the first time I remember witnessing the world change in a way that couldn't be undone. Before that day, things they felt permanent. Trees grew, birds came back, the places where you hid during games stayed exactly where you left them. But that morning taught me something different. The world could lose things. And when it did, someone had to notice. I don't remember crying in front of anyone that day. I remember feeling the tears come and I swallowed them back. I didn't really understand what I was feeling yet, and I wasn't sure anyone else would either. So I just stood there quietly and watched. Looking back now, I realize that that moment stayed with me. It quietly shaped the way I move through the world. I became the kind of person who notices things, the kind of person who listens for small shifts when something changes before anyone else says it out loud. For a long time, I thought feeling things that deeply was a curse. I felt things other people seemed to walk past without noticing, losses that looked small to others but felt enormous to me. I often felt like I was standing just slightly outside of things, observing. But over time, I realized something else. That sensitivity, the thing I once thought was a weakness, became the very thing that shaped my life. As a therapist, I sit with people while they talk about their losses, losses that don't always look dramatic from the outside, the quiet dismantling of a relationship, the moment someone realizes their childhood wasn't what they thought it was, the slow recognition that something inside them has been hurting for a very long time. And as a playwright, I'm drawn again and again to the moments where the world shifts, where something changes and suddenly everything looks different. And it looks much different, more so than it did just 5 minutes before. That tree was the first place I learned that magic can exist in ordinary things. A trunk can be a counting post, leaves can play catch, birds might actually listen if you sing soft enough. But it was also the first place I learned something else, that magic can disappear. And when it does, someone has to notice. Someone has to speak up. When it's hard, when it's inconvenient, I learned that we are all tied together, like the trees of the forest. Even now, when I see a tree standing quietly in a yard somewhere, I sometimes think about that morning at the kitchen window, about that 8-year-old girl watching something alive leave the world for the first time. I think that that was the moment I began paying attention differently, not to just what was there, but to what's fragile, what's changing, what might disappear. And I think that's where both my work and my writing really began. And that's my story, Jay.
Beautifully articulated there, Dana. You've already sort of answered the question that I like to ask all my guests, but I want to go a little bit deeper if possible. I know that you're a licensed therapist and you're
Mhm.
also a playwright. And I mean, it was pretty obvious as you're telling that story that you're a writer. But how do you think that moment as a little 8-year-old, you've sort of said it already, but how do you think it's impacted your work directly? Yeah, both as writer, have you, I mean, maybe you've even written stories of it or plays of it, of that notion of loss, but I'm not going to speak for you. So tell me, how do you think that event has impacted who you are?
Yeah, thank you for asking, Jay. It's the first time I told that story to anyone, and now everyone gets to hear it. I guess I've been holding on to that one in kind of my back pocket, if you will. I have these very vivid images of that morning, and it's always stayed with me. And I appreciate the opportunity to share it here today to try to make some sense of it, I guess. I think something that it taught me was that life will hold both beauty and loss at the same time. We lose things that we love, and the world will change in ways that we can't undo, but that noticing matters, and that there is magic in small, ordinary places. And that as a storyteller has been so important to me. I try to really focus on the subtext of moments. And I think that is rooted in this story of the tree. Is there was so much subtext for me as a child that I couldn't put it into words at that time. And I think a lot of us struggle with that. We have these moments in our life that we don't always put into words, and they're important and profound. And just that morning shifted my life really in the way that I saw the world. And you making an opportunity for folks like me to share these types of stories really unites us in the shared understanding that though moments might appear small, they can carry multitudes. So I think that in therapy, that is how I approach it as well, to sit and process with someone the stories of their life that gives them meaning and purpose, and to find their resiliency. It's a gift to be able to do that on a daily basis, to sit with people in moments. And I'm often taken aback by how simple moments shape entire lives.
Yeah, I feel that what you're saying. That little 8-year-old person who, like, why are they doing this to this beautiful thing? But and you said something like, well, the magic disappears and things don't last forever. I mean, that is a death that you witnessed, actually, a life that was taken, and that is often, I think, what people think about. Sometimes relatives, a grandparent or something else, but in this case, an actual tree, which meant a lot to you. But you seem to be able to still retain the magics through perhaps your writing or your profession. I mean, you said the magic disappeared, and I was like, oh no, did she get it back? Did she get it back? So can you just tell me? I mean, there's magic in the moments subsequent, obviously, isn't there?
Mhm. Yeah, I think for me in that moment, I felt that the magic left. There was this whole magical world that tree was a part of, and that it set the stage for. And when it left, I felt that loss. And I'm glad that you picked up on that, because I think I wanted to exemplify that in the story, that you can grieve the loss of situations, of people, of things that never happened, expectations. There's a lot that we grieve as human beings. And that was the first time I encountered grief. Years after that, I would encounter different kinds of loss. But I think that I don't want to say in a hardened kind of way, but in a it kind of it gave some layers to my heart, maybe, and helped me to encounter other losses that happened along the way, knowing that things expire is a lesson that we all go through. And what we make of that and make sense of that is really, it really shapes our understanding of the world and the hereafter as well, I suppose. So, yes, that was my first encounter with a grief or a loss. And so it did feel very much like the end of something. But now I do have my own children, and I try to be more sensitive to the changes that happen and how they might perceive that. But there's a lot of magic. And every time I get to experience someone's story, write a script, and tell narratives, that glimmer of magic always comes back.
Love it. Well, I'm going to leave you at that. I want to thank you for coming on the show. It is, I think, a universal story in the sense of everybody knows what you're talking about. Maybe there are different experiences that people have. Nobody has the same experience you've had, but you definitely hit a nerve telling me that story. So thank you for coming on the show. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Sideline Ink Publishing, publishers of quality books, and now 10 by 10 Black Hole Chess. 10 by 10 Black Hole Chess is a new way to play chess where the openings that are traditional do not work because the center cannot be controlled. So if you get a chance, check out blackholechess.com and maybe you'll become a better chess player. So until next time, this is Jay Rehak asking you all to please stay safe out there and try not to hurt anybody.